The Rolls Royce Phantom didn't belong on Meridian Street. That was the first thing everyone noticed, the way it glided through the cracked, oil-stained asphalt like a ghost that had accidentally wandered into the wrong world. Meridian Street was a place of bicycle bells and shouted prices, of fish scaled on open wooden boards and children weaving between adult legs without apology. It was a street that smelled like ambition and desperation in equal measure, charcoal smoke, frying onions, cheap perfume, and the particular sourness of people who had been working since before the sun rose. The Rolls Royce did not belong here. And yet, there it was. Nadia Osei didn't look up right away. She never looked up when expensive cars rolled through. They were usually lost, usually the kind of people who stared at her cart with a mixture of pity and disgust before tapping their navigation screen and disappearing back into the city's cleaner arteries. She had learned, at 23 years of age, that expensive cars were not for her. They were a different species of thing, like private jets and country club memberships and the kind of shoes that had never touched a puddle. She was focused on her cinnamon rolls. That's what she sold, fresh, hand-rolled cinnamon pastries from a stainless steel cart that she had saved 14 months to purchase. Before the cart, she'd sold them from a basket balanced on her head, the old way, the way her grandmother had done in Accra before she emigrated. The cart was an upgrade. The cart had a small gas burner that kept the rolls warm, a glass shield to protect them from street dust, and a handwritten sign that said, Nadia's Rolls, $2 each, $3-4-5, made with love and a little bit of butter. The sign had been her foster mother's idea. People buy feelings, not food, Miss Cora had told her. Give them a feeling. Nadia had given the sign a hand-drawn heart in red marker. She didn't know if it helped sales, but it made her feel less invisible on days when the city moved around her like water around a stone. She was pulling a fresh tray from the warming rack, the cinnamon steam rising in curls around her face, when the Rolls Royce stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Right in front of her cart. The street noise dimmed slightly, the way it always did when something unusual interrupted the rhythm. Nearby vendors glanced over. A woman selling plantains 3 stalls down craned her neck. A boy chasing a stray cat froze mid-stride and stared at the car's silver grille with open-mouthed reverence. Nadia set down her tray. Looked up. The car was black, not the matte black of something trying too hard, but the deep, liquid black of something that simply was. The kind of black that absorbed light. The rear window was tinted, and for a long moment nothing happened. The car just sat there, engine a barely audible purr, while the rest of Meridian Street performed the unconscious theater of pretending not to stare while staring intensely. Then the door opened. The man who stepped out was tall, the kind of tall that announced itself before the rest of him did. He wore a charcoal suit that fit the way suits only fit when they are made specifically for one body. His hair was silver at the temples, dark at the crown, cut close and precise. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, though the architecture of his face, the strong jaw, the sharp cheekbones, made age seem like a suggestion rather than a fact. A younger man in a black jacket moved swiftly from the front passenger seat, falling into step slightly behind him, a bodyguard, clearly, trying and failing to look casual on a street where everything about both of them screamed wrong neighborhood. The man walked directly toward Nadia's cart. She watched him come with the careful attention she gave to all customers, assessing, categorizing, preparing the automatic smile and the practiced hello. She noted his cufflinks. She noted the way the bodyguard's eyes moved across the street in small, quick sweeps. She noted that the man's stride had an unusual quality to it, something she couldn't immediately name, like someone moving through a location they had been to only in memory, touching it carefully to see if it matched the version they carried inside. He stopped at her cart. Up close, his eyes were extraordinary. Dark brown, almost black, but with a quality of depth that made Nadia feel briefly like she was standing at the edge of something rather than behind a pastry cart. They settled on her face with an intensity that made the automatic smile dissolve before she could produce it. "Good morning," she said instead. The professional instinct. Always greet. Always be the one who speaks first. Miss Cora's training, running like software beneath every interaction. Cinnamon rolls, 3 for $5. Still warm. The man didn't look at the cart. He was looking at her face. Not in the way men sometimes looked at her face on Meridian Street, the slow, assessing look she had learned to meet with a flat, discouraging stare. This was different. This was the look of someone doing frantic internal arithmetic. Someone checking something against something else. Someone whose composure, polished to a mirror shine, was developing a hairline fracture directly in front of her. "I'll take 3, he said. His voice was low, measured, the voice of someone accustomed to rooms going quiet when he spoke. Nadia reached for the tongs. $4.75. I'll call it $4.50 if you've got exact change. She gave a small, practiced smile. People buy feelings. No surcharge for the fancy car. Something shifted in his expression. The hairline fracture widened. You have your mother's sense of humor, he said. Nadia's hand stopped on the tongs. The street noise continued around them, the plantain woman haggling, the boy resuming his chase, a motorbike threading too fast through the gaps, but at the cart, something had gone very still. Excuse me? Nadia said. The man's jaw tightened. He seemed to be waging an internal war, one side of which was clearly losing. I apologize. I shouldn't have said that without, he stopped. Pressed his fingers briefly to his forehead in a gesture that cracked the composed surface entirely. My name is Richard Ashford. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Ashford Holdings International. He paused. And I have reason to believe, that you are my daughter. Nadia stared at him. Behind the cart, the tongs were still in her hand, suspended over the cinnamon rolls. The steam continued to rise. A pigeon landed on the edge of the cart's glass shield, reconsidered, and flew away. You want 3 rolls or not? Nadia said. She had heard a lot of strange things from customers over the years. There was the man who had proposed marriage after his second visit, citing her cinnamon rolls as evidence that she was cosmically destined for him. There was the woman who had confided, in a whisper that somehow carried to 3 nearby stalls, that she believed Nadia's rolls contained a love potion. There was the teenager who had tried to pay with a gift card to a restaurant that had been closed for 2 years. Strange was not new on Meridian Street. But this man, Richard Ashford, CEO of something called Ashford Holdings International, was a different category of strange. Because he said it with the gravity of someone who had rehearsed it and then abandoned the rehearsal halfway through. He said it like it cost him something. And he said it while looking at her face with those dark, deep eyes as though he were reading a document he had been searching for across a great distance and a great many years. She took his money. She put 3 rolls in a paper bag. She handed it over. I think you have the wrong person, she said pleasantly. He accepted the bag. Did not leave. Your name is Nadia, he said. Nadia Osei. You're 23 years old. You were born on March 14th at St. Camilla's Hospital. You were placed in foster care at the age of 4 and you've been in the system, in various placements, until you aged out at 18. You've been running this cart for, approximately 14 months, based on the business registration record. The pleasantness left her face. You've been researching me, she said. Yes. That's not flattering. That's alarming. I understand. He didn't shift or fidget. Just held the paper bag and looked at her. I'm not here to alarm you. I've been looking for you for 6 years. I hired private investigators. It took a significant amount of time because the records were sealed and because... He paused. Because someone made it deliberately difficult to find you. Someone, Nadia repeated. Yes. And you think that someone is connected to whatever story you've decided involves me. I don't think, he said. I know. And it's not a story I've decided. It's a fact I've confirmed. He reached into his jacket, the bodyguard tensed almost imperceptibly, and produced a small envelope. He set it on the edge of her cart. DNA confirmation. I submitted a sample 6 weeks ago, along with a sample obtained, with her knowledge and permission, from your foster mother, Cora Williams, who provided a cheek swab from a medical record she kept from when you were 7 years old. The confirmation rate is 99.97%. He looked at the envelope. You don't have to read it now. But it's yours. Nadia looked at the envelope. It was cream-colored, heavy stock, with the name of a genetics laboratory printed in discrete letters in the corner. It sat on the edge of her cart between the paper bag dispenser and the small jar of toothpicks she provided for customers who ate their rolls on the go. She had stood on this exact square of cracked asphalt for 14 months. She had watched the city change around her through 4 seasons, the summer heat that made the cinnamon caramelize faster, the autumn that blew napkins into the street, the winter that killed her sales by 40%, the spring that brought them roaring back. She had built something on this square of asphalt. Small, imperfect, entirely hers. She picked up the envelope. Put it under the counter. I have customers, she said. Richard Ashford looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, one single, controlled dip of the head. I'll leave my card. He placed it beside where the envelope had been. When you're ready. There's no pressure for a timeline. Another pause. I'm sorry for how I did this. I planned it differently and then I saw you and the composure cracked again, just slightly, at the edges. You look exactly like her. Like who? Nadia asked, before she could stop herself. Your mother, he said. My wife. Elena. He turned and walked back to the Rolls Royce. The bodyguard fell into step behind him. The car absorbed them both, the door closed with the soft, definitive sound of an extremely expensive mechanism, and the Phantom glided back into traffic and was gone. On Meridian Street, the plantain woman drifted over, unable to help herself. Who was that? Wrong address, Nadia said, and turned back to her cart. She didn't open the envelope until midnight. The apartment she rented was a single room above a dry cleaning shop on Voss Street, 12 minutes from Meridian by foot, slightly less if she cut through the loading dock behind the Vietnamese restaurant whose owner sometimes left dumplings in a paper bag on the step as a form of neighborly currency. The room had a window that looked at a brick wall, a radiator that clanged violently in winter and was silent and useless in summer, and a kitchenette in which she had managed to install a second-hand stand mixer that took up 40% of the counter space because it was how she made the dough for her rolls at 4 in the morning before pushing the cart to Meridian. She sat on her bed with the envelope in her hands and Miss Cora's voice in her head. A door that knocks itself open isn't always a gift, baby. Sometimes it's a test. She'd called Miss Cora on the way home. Cora Williams was 61, lived in Braddock Heights, and had fostered 43 children over 30 years, of whom she claimed to love all equally and actually loved about 6 with a particularity she would have died before admitting. Nadia was one of the 6. She had arrived at Cora's door at 9 years old, her 4th placement, with a garbage bag of belongings, 2 broken crayons, and the specific closed-down expression of a child who had learned that hope was a liability. She had stayed for 9 years. He came to the cart, Nadia had said, standing outside the Vietnamese restaurant with a bag of the neighbor's dumplings getting cold in her hand. A long pause on Cora's end. Then, I know. You know. He called me, baby. 6 weeks ago. Asked for the medical record. I should have told you. I wanted to wait until he confirmed it so I wasn't putting something in your head that might. Cora. I know. I'm sorry. Is it true? The longest pause. The kind that answered the question before the words did. The records were sealed because your mama asked for it, Cora had said, and her voice had a texture to it that Nadia had only heard a few times before, the sound of a woman choosing truth over comfort while wishing she could choose the other way. She was sick, Nadia. She had a condition, I don't know all the details, she'd been dealing with it for years. She and Richard, they'd been separated, there was some kind of trouble between them, something about his family and his business and she was scared and she was sick and she made a decision to put you somewhere safe rather than leave you inside whatever was happening to them. She thought she was buying herself time to get well and come back for you. She didn't get well. She died. When you were 6. Yes. Nadia had stood on the sidewalk for a long time after that. The dumplings got cold. A taxi sprayed a puddle against her left shoe. The city continued in its indifferent, magnificent way. Why didn't you ever tell me any of this? She had asked. Because the record was sealed and because it wasn't mine to tell and because I was afraid, Cora said quietly. Not of him. Of what it would do to you to know and not be found. A child who knows she's lost hurts different than a child who doesn't know what she is. It was, Nadia thought, both an explanation and an apology. She had accepted it in the way she had learned to accept imperfect things, not dismissing them, not enshrining them, but finding the place where they fit in the understanding she had of the world. She had said goodnight to Cora. She had come home. Now she opened the envelope. The document inside was printed on laboratory letterhead, dense, technical, formatted in the language of science that reduced the enormous chaos of human origin to percentages and allele markers. She read it without fully understanding the technical portions but understanding perfectly the bolded summary statement in the conclusion paragraph, which said, with the clinical certainty of a field that did not deal in sentiment, probability of paternity, 99.97%. She sat with it for a while. Then she picked up Richard Ashford's business card. It was heavier than a normal card. The paper stock alone cost more than her cart's weekly profit margin. The name was embossed in dark ink, Richard Ashford, Chairman and CEO, Ashford Holdings International, and below it, a direct line, a personal email, and in the corner, in smaller letters, an address, the Ashford Building, 1 Commerce Plaza, downtown. She had passed the Ashford Building twice in her life. Once on a school trip that had taken her through downtown on a rented bus, when she'd looked up at its 43 glass floors and thought it belonged to a different category of world than hers. Once last year, when she'd gotten lost cutting through downtown after a supply run and had stood on the opposite sidewalk looking at the building's entrance, The doormen in black coats, the revolving glass doors, the black cars, the people who moved in and out of it like they had been manufactured to fit that scale. She put the card down. She put the envelope on her nightstand. She set her alarm for 4 a.m. In the morning, she would make the dough. She lasted 5 days. 5 days of making dough at 4 a.m., pushing the cart to Meridian, selling rolls to the morning crowd, watching the spot where the Rolls Royce had parked as though it might reappear. 5 days of Cora calling every evening. 5 days of holding the business card, reading the number, putting it down. On the 5th night, she called. He answered on the 2nd ring, which she found revealing. A man who answered his personal line on the 2nd ring was either expecting a specific call or was the kind of person who did not make people wait. She suspected it was both. "Nadia," he said. "Not a question. How did you know it was me?" "I've had your number since the first day. I obtained it from the business registration." A pause. "I'm sorry. I know that sounds invasive." "Yes. I was going to call and then I thought showing up was better and then I showed up and it was," he stopped. "I handled the first meeting poorly." "You did," she agreed. "I'd like the opportunity to do better." She looked at the envelope on her nightstand. At the business card beside it. At the stand mixer on the counter that she'd bought with 14 months of 4 a.m. mornings and $2 rolls. "I want to ask you something first," she said. "Anything. If she put me in the system to keep me safe, what was she keeping me safe from?" The pause on his end was different from the pauses in their first conversation. Those had been controlled hesitations. This one had a weight to it, a specific gravity that made her grip the phone a little tighter. "That," he said, slowly, "is a very long answer. And it's the reason that when we meet, and I hope we will meet, I'll need to ask you to be somewhere private. Not because I'm trying to control the situation. But because there are people who," he stopped again. Chose different words. "Your mother hid you for a reason, Nadia. And the reason didn't die with her." The radiator clanged once, loudly, in the silence. "There are people who don't want you found," he said. "Who have, in fact, spent considerable resources ensuring you stayed lost. People who are close to me. Who I trust." Another pause. "Who I trusted." The past tense landed like a stone in still water. "Who?" she asked. "My brother," he said. "And my son." She agreed to meet him the following Saturday. Not at the Ashford building, too formal, too much on his ground. Not on Meridian Street, too public, too exposed, and besides, something in her resisted the idea of the two worlds colliding again on her square of asphalt. They agreed on a restaurant in the neutral middle zone of the city, a small, privately owned place in the Garland district that he apparently knew because it had once been owned by a friend of his. Private booths. Quiet. She spent the week trying to behave normally and doing a poor job of it. The rolls she made on Thursday were overproofed because she let the dough sit too long while she sat at her counter reading everything she could find about Ashford Holdings International. It was not difficult to find. The company was a $4.2 billion multinational with interests in real estate development, private equity, and infrastructure investment across 4 continents. Richard Ashford had built it from a regional property company inherited from his own father, had taken it international in his late 30s, and was described in the business press as relentlessly private and extraordinarily shrewd, and a man who values loyalty above almost all other professional virtues. Which Nadia suspected was the kind of thing that was said about powerful people when what was meant was that they were quietly formidable in ways that didn't always photograph well. He had been married once. Elena Mensah Ashford. Originally from Kumasi, Ghana, which produced in Nadia a complex internal reaction she was not prepared for and chose to park in a corner of her mind to examine later. Elena had died in her late 20s from a cardiac condition that had gone undiagnosed until it was too late. There were almost no photographs of her in the public record, 1 or 2 from a charity event, partial and half-turned, as though the camera had caught her in motion. Nadia studied them for a long time anyway. She could see it. She could see why he had been startled. The bone structure. The angle of the jaw. The particular way one corner of the mouth sat slightly higher than the other, not quite a smirk and not quite a smile but something in between, a private, contained expression that Nadia had always thought was simply hers and now understood was inherited. She put the laptop away. She proofed a new batch of dough. She did not sleep well. The restaurant was called Garland and Vine, and it had the specific quality of a place that did not need to announce itself. No sign visible from the street. A dark wood door. A small brass plate with only the address number. Inside, warm light, low ceilings, the smell of good food and older wood, and a host who clearly knew Richard Ashford well enough to produce a slight bow and lead them to a rear booth without being asked. She arrived first. On purpose. She needed the advantage of being settled before he walked in. He arrived 4 minutes later, without the bodyguard this time, though she noticed as she watched him cross the restaurant that his eyes made the same quick sweep of the room that the bodyguard had performed on Meridian Street. A learned behavior, or an instinct. She filed it. He sat across from her. He looked, she thought, like he had also not been sleeping well. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I have questions." "I expected you would." He settled his hands on the table, a deliberate stillness, she recognized, the body language of someone demonstrating that they had nothing to hide. "I'll answer everything I can." "Why did it take you 6 years to find me? You have a $4 billion company. You have investigators. Why 6 years?" He nodded once, as though this was the right question to start with. "When Elena died, I didn't know you existed. She had kept the pregnancy, kept you, entirely hidden from me. We had been separated. It was." He chose words carefully. "A manufactured separation. I believed, at the time, that she had left because she no longer wanted to be in the marriage. I found out later that she had been told to leave. Shown evidence, fabricated evidence, that I had been unfaithful. That I intended to divorce her myself and that she would receive nothing. She was already sick. She was frightened. And someone close to me had engineered the entire thing." "Your brother." "My brother Daniel," he confirmed. "And my son, Carter." Nadia absorbed this. "Your son helped destroy his own mother's marriage." "Carter is not Elena's son," Richard said. "He is from a previous relationship. He was 17 when I married Elena. He and Daniel," he paused. "Elena was in line to inherit a significant portion of the Ashford family trust, as my wife. And if she and I had a child together, that child would have inherited an equal share with Carter. It was." He looked at his hands briefly. "It was a matter of money. It is always, in families like mine, a matter of money. They didn't know about me." "No. Elena had hidden the pregnancy successfully. She died before she could come back for you or tell me. I didn't know you existed until 3 years after her death, when I was going through her personal papers that had been stored in a facility and that I had delayed sorting through because," a brief silence. "Because grief is not on a schedule," Nadia thought. "Because it was difficult. In those papers, I found a letter she had written but never sent. To me. Telling me about the pregnancy. Telling me what she had done and why. Telling me," his voice, so controlled, so deliberately steady, moved slightly off its axis. "Telling me your name." Nadia sat very still. "I started looking immediately," he said. "But the records were sealed under a name that wasn't hers, through a third-party placement agency that had since closed, and someone had, this is what took me years to prove, someone had accessed the records. Had deliberately complicated them. Had flagged your file in the system in ways that made the standard search protocols return nothing." "Daniel and Carter," she said. "Carter. Specifically. He has significant technical resources at his disposal and enough legal knowledge to understand how the system worked." His jaw tightened. "I didn't discover his involvement until 14 months ago. Which is, coincidentally, approximately when you obtained your business registration. You started watching the registration records. I had investigators monitoring any newly registered sole proprietorships by young women in the city matching Elena's physical description. It was a long shot. But you filed your registration with your legal name, which matched the name Elena had written in her letter, and the birthday matched, and," he stopped. "An investigator called me at 7 in the morning and I was in Singapore and I flew home the same day." The restaurant murmured around them. Someone laughed at a table on the other side of the room. The warm light moved across the wood. "What do Daniel and Carter know?" she asked. "Do they know you found me?" Richard's expression shifted. This, she realized, was the part he had been building toward. "No," he said. "And this is what I needed to tell you in private. They cannot know yet. Because if they know I found you, they will move to protect themselves before I have the legal infrastructure to act against them for what they did to Elena. And, more immediately, there is a portion of the Ashford family trust that becomes accessible to you on your 24th birthday, by the terms of the original trust document, if you are proven to be my direct descendant. Your birthday is March 14th. He looked at her. "That is 11 weeks from today." March 14th. 11 weeks. "They'll try to stop it," she said. "They'll try to stop you," he corrected, quietly. The trust document cannot be altered. But you can be discredited, disappeared, legally, made to seem illegitimate through manufactured evidence, through legal challenge, through, he stopped. I am not telling you this to frighten you. I am telling you because you deserve to know exactly what you are walking into, and because I need you to understand that I am not bringing you into my world for the money. I want to be clear about that. I want that on the table. Then what are you bringing me into your world for? She asked. He looked at her with those dark, deep eyes. The eyes that had stopped his Rolls Royce on a broken street and walked it toward a girl selling cinnamon rolls. Because you're my daughter, he said. And I have lost 23 years. And I am not willing to lose another day. She pushed the cart home that evening in the blue-gray hour before dark. The city was doing its usual end-of-day transformation, the loosening, the shift change, the particular quality of light that made even ugly buildings seem briefly considered. She pushed the cart and thought about the word daughter and how it sat differently now than it had 6 days ago. It was still enormous. Still a word that her life, up to this point, had not had architecture for. But it was beginning to have edges. Specific, complicated, real edges. She thought about Elena. A woman from Kumasi who had loved a man and been taken from him by the people closest to him. Who had carried a child alone and hidden her to keep her safe and never come back. A woman whose face she wore on her own bones without having known it. She thought about Carter, whom she had not yet met, and Daniel, whom she had not yet met, and the 11 weeks of calendar between now and her 24th birthday. She thought about what Richard had said as she was putting on her coat to leave. I don't expect anything from you, Nadia. Not loyalty, not love, not even belief, not yet. All I ask is that you let me prove what I'm telling you is real before you decide what to do with it. She had looked at him then and said, I've been reading people across a cart counter for 14 months. I know what it looks like when someone is lying. And he had said, and? And she had picked up her bag and walked out, because she needed him to sit with the open question, and because the open question was, in fact, her answer. She was not ready to trust him. But she was not going to disappear. She brought the cart to its overnight spot, locked it, and stood in the cooling air for a moment. Somewhere in the city, a black Rolls Royce was moving through streets she didn't know, carrying a man who had found a letter 19 years too late and spent 6 years trying to undo what that lateness had cost. Somewhere else in the same city, a man named Carter and a man named Daniel were living their ordinary, protected lives, not knowing that the variable they had erased from the equation had just been added back. Nadia put her hands in her pockets. She walked home. She set her alarm for 4 a.m. The dough needed making.